Yeah, so I'm Jon-Mark, and I am Apollo View, I guess. Let me try and think of a better way to phrase this. Because I like, or Apollo View Modular, because Apollo View is technically not me, but Apollo View Modular. And am I Apollo View Modular, or am I the guy behind Apollo View Modular? Yeah, let's go with that. Yeah, so I am Jon-Mark, and I am the guy behind Apollo View Modular. Apollo View started off as me and my friend Tom, our production duo name, and morphed over time into me making modules and now plugins. I was always curious about electronics and synthesizers and things. I mean, like I went to university in 1999, and because I hadn't done a maths A-level, some wacky career guidance at school that I'd done physics and hadn't done maths A-level. So I had to do a catch-up year, like a foundation year, and I got some exposure to electronics. I probably at that point could have like chosen whether to refocus from what I did study, which was astrophysics. I could have chosen to gone down the maths route or the electronics route or computer science route, because I got exposure to all those things in the foundation year. And at the time, like I was heavily into DJing at the time. I was regularly DJing like 2 or 3 times a week at least. And to my naive mind, like electronics was done. There was no way that I could make a better mixer in my mind than the analog mixers that existed at the time for DJing, or make a better record player than a Technics deck. Like to my mind, there was not much interest or point in getting into electronics, because all the things that excited me about electronics seem to have already been perfected and mastered. So there didn't really seem to be much need. But I had some exposure to electronics then. So when I got more and more into producing music and using more synthesizers and things, I was always curious about if it was something that I'd be able to do, to actually make synthesizers, design and build my own synthesizers. And so yeah, it came from there, from curiosity, I guess. My roots, I can tell you exactly like where I had these like epiphanies or these mind-altering, mind-opening moments. One specific thing in particular was like a birthday present or a Christmas present that I got bought when I was like, I don't know, 7, 8 or 9, something around there. And it was just an FM radio, but it looked like a walkie-talkie, and it had like this like walkie-talkie kind of aerial on it. And for some reason that picked up reception way better than any other radio in the house. And from my room at my parents' house, which is on top of a hill, which is outside of London quite a considerable way, but I could pick up all the pirate radio stations that were broadcasting out of Hackney in East London. I could pick them up in crystal clear clarity. And so from a very young age, I used to sit in my room at night just listening to pirate radio stations. And at that point, I had no idea how they were generating this kind of music. Like, I guess as a kid, your exposure to music is like bands. And in my head, like, I don't know, I was kind of like picturing little people playing insanely fast breakbeat drum beats. And I don't know how the electronic sounds or the bass lines are being generated, but in my head, I kind of like pictured that. So I got heavily into early rave and what hardcore really was before it kind of like split down the happy hardcore. And at that point, I guess proto jungle. So I was heavily into that kind of music very, very early on. And I also remember listening in the car. My mum used to pick up like bargain bucket cassette tapes from a shop called Wars, which in the UK at least doesn't exist anymore. And I think she picked up a Future Sound of London cassette of Papua New Guinea, and like for like 10 pence or whatever out the bargain bucket. And remember listening to that in the car, and my brain just going, "Oh my god, what is this music?" And so yeah, I was heavily interested in it from a very young age. And yeah, started DJing from, I guess, like 10 or something. Like, I had my dad's Leak record player, which had like this tiny rotary pitch control for 33 and for 45. I had that, and I had this like kind of almost looked like a gramophone thing that my mum, who was a teacher, had brought home from school, which was like a huge box with self-contained speakers and everything in it, and crazily speed control, which was between 14 revolutions per minute, 33, 45, and 78. And I had this really bad like mixer from this shop called Tandy, also doesn't exist anymore, like the UK equivalent of Radio Shack. And using those three things, I was like blending together every record that I could find in my dad's record collection that would kind of go with the records that I was buying at the time from like 10 years old, early jungle and like I say, hardcore stuff, and trying to mix them all together and trying to get a cappella bits to fit over drum and bass and stuff. So yeah, that's how it started really early on. I first got into producing, I mean, I was DJing, as I say, from a young age, and then got into producing quite early on. One of my best friends had acquired an old Atari, which was then had Cubase on it, which was just a sequencer, and I think it was a Roland keyboard. So just 16 channels of MIDI, and whatever the sounds were that were contained on side of that keyboard was how I first started producing. But again, started really early. Um, and then yeah, acquired uh MicroLogic from eMagic before eMagic sold it to Apple. And that was the first time that I could actually sample stuff. And yeah, it was obviously very naive and learning, hadn't gone to school to learn how to produce. There wasn't really that many like music production courses back then at that time. So it was all kind of learning by doing, which, you know, is actually one of the best ways to do it compared to getting stuck these days, people watching endless YouTube tutorials and not actually making anything. Back then, the only way you could do it was just by trial and error, which was a great way to learn. And yeah, so everything was in the box initially, and it was stayed that way for a very long time. And then I guess, as most people do, once they've been producing for a long time, you naturally progress to wanting to steer away from using the mouse or MIDI controller to control stuff inside of the box and actually use some hardware. So I started buying a few hardware synths and bits and pieces. And yeah, I mean, this is much later on in my life, as I'd been producing for, I don't know, over a decade or so without really owning any hardware. Um, but yeah, in like 2018, I think I started experimenting with Eurorack, specifically getting DIY kits and soldering them and building up a very small little case with some Eurorack things, which then over time kind of, you know, as Eurorack does for those that have gone to it, um, it is a bit of a black hole, bit of a rabbit hole, and you start somehow finding some more money to buy more modules. And yeah, it was, yeah, at that point I'd been playing around with DIY kits, and I'd started playing around with making my dad and my brother-in-law, who play guitar, some DIY guitar pedal projects and giving them to them for birthday presents and Christmas presents. And so yeah, that's where I started experimenting with electronics. And I kind of enjoyed it. I started soldering some things. Also, I remember that my Pioneer DJ mixer had got really crusty and broken, and I opened it up and grabbed a soldering iron, which I don't know, remember exactly. No, I think I had to buy one. I bought a really cheap, bad soldering iron to try and fix some things inside of my old Pioneer DJ M500 mixer. And yeah, that kind of experimentation and playing around, and a chance encounter with Look Mum No Computer kind of led me to have the confidence to actually try to make some proper synthesizer projects. So yeah, I had a manager at that point. I'm making music. I had a manager, still a good friend. Was originally my friend, became my manager. But as I'm no longer actively making music, really, don't really have him as a manager. But he had invited me to an industry event where Look Mum No Computer was playing. And after his performance, we just got chatting over a beer. And I said, you know, I've did a little bit of electronics at university, and I'd always been curious how hard or how easy it was, or what it took, or where to start with making synthesizers. So he pointed me in a few different directions. And after trying to wrap my head around a data sheet for the Curtis Electro Music 3340 synth chip, which is in memory mood, Prophet 5, loads of other famous synthesizers. It was a bit too much for me at that point. It was way above what I understood and what I could process. So instead I found a DIY project to make an 808 kick, because that's one of the things which has been fundamental in all of my music production. I'm very much into replicating that drum and bass kind of sound, bass music, and the 808 was a staple thing in my music production. So I thought, yeah, great, let's make a 808 synth voice, the kick drum synth voice. So that was the first thing I did, and it worked out great. It didn't work out perfect first time of asking, but after a lot of perseverance and a lot of faffing about, because I was making it on some very fragile, what's called perf board, with lots of tangled wires on the back, which can really easily break. But yeah, I got it working, and then I guess I caught the bug from there, because then I wanted to make the snare and the hi-hat and the cowbell, and so I did. And the ones that I'd made on crappy perf board, I remade onto something called strip board, Vero board, which has got copper connections on it instead, which was a little bit more stable. And so yeah, before I knew it, I'd actually built all of the voice cards from the 808. And yeah, so I housed them in a box, and that was really the first product. It was a clone, but the first thing that I made was the 808. And yeah, from there it grew. And I, having that experience of making the 808 synth voices and having trigger ins and audio outs, I was like, okay, now I kind of get it. Now I can kind of see what's going on behind modules, because before I used to look at them, I'm like, I see the front panel, I get how the front panel works, but I have absolutely no idea about the architecture and what's going on in the design behind the front panel. But that 808 project gave me the confidence and the insights to figure out that maybe I'd be able to do it. And so yeah, that was where I developed the confidence to start beginning making modules. Yeah, so right now we're in my studio space, which I share with 3 other people. One of them is sat over there. But yeah, so here we've got the production environment. Behind us over there is I don't know if you can, I guess it is a monster case. There's a monster case of Eurorack, and over there is all the DJing equipment. And so this is just one room in a big complex. There's some video game developers next door, and then like a kitchen, and through the kitchen is my workshop space for coding and for developing modules now. So yeah, this is where I don't get to spend so much time anymore, because I'm so busy developing things. But if I was to be making music and doing mixing and mastering, this is where I'd be, because that's where before I started making modules, that was always where my technical mindset drew me to, was the mixing and mastering process. I love producing, but I really, really enjoyed the mixing and mastering process. So that's what you see behind me. The way that I'm making things now is, I guess, a bit streamlined to how it was in the beginning. But yeah, I tend to, well, I mean, I have so many concepts and ideas. I think at the moment I've got 13 ideas that are in some stage of development, which the priority list sometimes gets juggled around depending on what I find the most interesting. There's some projects which I've had going for a few years now, which haven't seen the light of day, which need to work their way back up to the top of the priority list. But as for the process, it's, yeah, refining what the core concept and the core idea is. I'm not one for necessarily just creating modules for the sake of creating modules. I guess the classic example I've been saying to people is, like, I don't know if there's any reason for me to make a function generator. Great function generators already exist. I'm not going to go out of my way to try and recreate a module like that just for the sake of it at this time. So for me, it's all about finding modules that add something in terms of character and tone, and trying to create something which doesn't exactly exist already. That said, some of my modules are clone-ish, like the vamp filter. It isn't an MS-20 filter underneath, but it's the same topology as an MS-20 filter underneath, but with the added character of the tube clipping circuit rather than diode clipping circuit from an MS-20. So yeah, so some of the modules have got their own character, but might be based loosely on some older designs. But typically I try and find a way of doing something new, something creative, but specifically it's all about creating character and tone for me. In the very beginning, I was trying to figure out a lot of the like sub circuits, which now that I've kind of got them refined, I can just reuse that part because I've used it in 7 released modules already. So, for example, like an attenuverter, like I've refined my own design for that, and I know that that part works. So I can just, where in the beginning I was figuring out those things, now I can just kind of copy and paste it. So it's simplified now in those terms. But very early on, it's about um, breadboarding and testing specific sub-circuits, which might be dependent on tone and character, and so switching in and out resistor or capacitor values to dial it in by ear. Like doing stuff technically and like off the data sheets is fine, but I always like to make sure that I've tested every possible combination so that I've got the best possible tone for what it is I'm trying to achieve. And yeah, and a lot of that then became working that up much quicker now from breadboard onto a PCB. I think at the beginning I spent so much more time working on the breadboard and almost building the entire module up on the breadboard, but now I kind of get parts down and generate a PCB with those things on there, and I'll then swap SMD components in and out around that. So that's why there's a hot plate, and there's also some tweezers for desoldering components like resistors, SMT resistors, so that yeah, I've got a more robust thing that I can work on and test from a very early standpoint. And I'll actually design development boards where I can have different options of different things, like swappable by a jumper or something like that, so that I can test things out on a much more robust structure than the breadboard. Because you can test what you like on the breadboard, and then once you convert that to a PCB with SMT, certain things can change. Track capacitances and changes in resistances, which differ on the PCB to the breadboard, can add up, and you can get a different sound. So yeah, I try and get things built up as quickly as possible now to a kind of finished design on, or not even finished, to prototype parts of it on different prototype boards, which I can then join those sub-circuits together. So that's kind of how that's evolved. As to what's going to come out next, that's always a challenge because there's many ideas and many things. But I think the next module which is going to come out is going to be a digital module. There's a few designs which have been worked on for a while, but due to reprioritizing, they've not been looked at for a while. But I'm interested to go and see those next, especially because I studied software development for 14 months to upskill myself. So now my coding skills have improved a lot, so I can go and revisit the first digital module and make sure that that's as good as it can be. That one potentially might be the next one. But then that also has taken me into making plugins. And with plugins, there's a very definite strategy. I can't say too much about the future ones, but the first thing important for me was to get a really good oscilloscope out there. I've always used oscilloscopes studying physics, and I've always used them in my music production. I find so much value being able just a very simple oscilloscope. You can even see the phase relationships between kick and bass, for example, if you know what to look for. And so creating an oscilloscope was important for me for my own production workflow, because I never found the perfect plug-in audio oscilloscope. But it also helps me to show how the modules are working, what exactly they're doing in terms of like looking at the outputs of oscillator. What do the wave shapes not just look like, but what do they look like harmonically? And DeltaScope has given me the ability to do that, because it's not just a waveform scope, it's also a spectrum analyzer. So you can look at both at the same time. Yeah, and then so the next plugin which is going to come out is going to be the partner, which is going to go with that. And I don't know, it always feels like there's something floating around in the air when it comes to modules, that if you don't execute an idea while you're having that feeling of that sensation, somebody else is going to do it before you. It's like it's out there in the ether and it wants to be channeled, and if you don't do it, somebody else is going to do it. And so yeah, with modules, it's a weird energetic resonation kind of feeling as to which ones need to come out next. So I've met some interesting people along the way, especially Italo Brutalo. He if you don't know him, he has I think almost every vintage synth that you could think of. And he does not, or didn't want to, and still doesn't want to, I should say, get into Eurorack. So he just bought a tiny little case, like a pod from 4MS, which has got like line level into modular and then back again, so that you can put his synthesizers and his 808s or other drum synths through rabbit holes. So he bought 2 rabbit holes so we can have stereo tube distortion. So yeah, so that's quite interesting because he never had Eurorack before. He bought those and he never wants to get any more Eurorack. He's going to stay with that case. But he felt it was the perfect pairing to go with his synths, which is actually the reason why I created it in the first place. Like while I was getting into Eurorack, I was finding that everything that I was recording in, tracking in, was way too pristine. And so I was using tube distortion emulations inside of the computer to rough up the sounds. And I thought, this is ridiculous. Like, if I'm doing that, I might as well just started with a Serum preset or something and then just distorted that with a tube saturation. So it kind of made no sense to me that it was tracking in Eurorack and then distorting it in the box. So I wanted something external in the Eurorack, which I could play around with and, you know, get my hands on to manipulate it. And so that's why Rabbit Hole, the first module, even existed. So the design language of the modules, which is all very coherent, is I'm kind of very lucky that it happened that way, because the original design of Rabbit Hole, which was the first module, didn't look the way that it does now. And it was only because I ran into problems with it. I can talk in detail about those problems later maybe, but yeah, because I ran into some delays, some problems with it, and I was simultaneously working on ALLSCILLATOR towards the end of the development of Rabbit Hole. I was also working on ALLSCILLATOR, and I have to shout out to Tom, who the other half of the Apollo View production duo. He is like a silent partner when it comes to some of these things, especially back in the early days. So I was looking at my ALLSCILLATOR design and trying to figure out how to get the LEDs to shine through and what my options were. And he and I together came up with this like Art Deco kind of style with the lines. So shout out to Tom for the assistance on that. So yeah, the design of ALLSCILLATOR came together, and then I was looking at ALLSCILLATOR next to Rabbit Hole, and I was like, this now doesn't really match the design of the Rabbit Hole, which had like a silkscreen rabbit hole pattern on it. Didn't really work anymore. And I was like, wait, I can make the rabbit hole abstract, just use the lines but make them arcs. And so yeah, the fact that it got delayed and didn't get released was a really good thing in the end, because I mean, I could go back and change the front panel. There's 250 old school rabbit hole designs laying around in a room somewhere. But yeah, they never saw the light of day to anybody else other than me. But yeah, it was really good because that brought the design language together, and that then informed all of the other modules since. So it gave me all of the key components that I needed to then figure out how to weave that into every other design. And it hasn't felt like it's been contrived. Every design, like the rings around Vamp to show the frequency cutoff in the red LEDs through the panel, like all of it feels natural and not contrived. And same goes for the other modules, which other people haven't seen yet. They all have this similar sort of design language, and it just naturally seems to fit. So I feel very blessed in the way that it all came together. In the early days of Apollo View, we did everything, including the manufacturing, in-house. And it wasn't just me. I had my other partner, who is actually a partner in the business, my wife, Janina, working on things and soldering things and assembling modules. She was putting all of the nuts and the banana nuts on the front panels, and I'd be soldering away, or sometimes she'd be doing soldering, and we'd be packing things in boxes. So it was very much a family effort at the beginning. But yeah, I have outsourced the manufacturing now, so we're no longer doing the manufacturing at home, partly because of our time constraints, because we have well, she's nearly 5, but I've got a daughter who's 5, so we don't have as much time at home as we used to. So yeah, I've had to outsource the manufacturing. I am theoretically a one-man show, but there's some important people that I've got around me. And shout out to DivKid as well, because he's also usually aware of what things I've got in development, and he can offer some insights or ideas and contributions to some designs. For example, like IOU doesn't have Ben's name on it, but some of the features in there were due to suggestions from DivKid. So yeah, so shout out to Ben too. If you want to find out more about the modules or the plugins, or more about Apollo View, yeah, there's a website which is apolloviewmodular.com, and you can see the range of all of the released modules there, and also you can see the plugins, which currently there's a free plugin called Scope, which I really wanted to exist because I grew up using a free audio oscilloscope for my music production. It wasn't perfect, but yeah, I made Scope so I could give something back to producers who needed a tool like that. And then the other currently available plugin is DELTASCOPE, which you can buy directly from the website. At the moment, we don't have a web shop for the modules, but you'll be able to find them in local retailers near you. My distributor ships everything worldwide to all the major Eurorack stores, so you should be able to find them there. And we have a contact page on the website, and I recently started a blog so we could journal all the things that we're up to. Aside from that, I'm going to be creating lots of content. So rundowns, not just of the modules that are Apollo View modules, but just general synthesis. And I believe that I can offer something there to people. I think maybe there's some people out there that have got Eurorack and haven't necessarily had the same experience about how to track and produce and mix and master things once they want to make a finished product, where I've got quite a lot of experience in that. So yeah, I want to create some content around like the whole process of making music with modular, from basic synthesis concepts all the way through to finishing tracks, tracking them, mixing and mastering them. Yeah, trying to offer the full service. So I'm going to be making YouTube content for that. As part of that, that'll get documented on the blog under the tutorial section. And yeah, there's just also going to be a journal where we're talking about stuff which is going on, what might be in development, and where you might be able to see me at the next trade shows or whatever else we might have been up to.